In this module, we're going to look at data access statements, which are the action diagram statements to read data from the database and also update data in the database. In the last module, we created a couple of entity types, user and logon history, and they were implemented into the data structure within a database for the table, user and logon history. Because I've implemented these in a database within my Oracle instance called DBIE, I'm just going to change the name of the database to match my database instance. So there's my database, and if we look at our logon action diagram, we've added validation of the password, and now, having successfully validated the password, maybe we want to check the user exists in our user table. And to do that, I'm going to put that logic in a separate action block. So I'm going to create a use statement and I'm going to add a new action block. Validate and log on. And then within my validate and log on action block, I'm going to create a read statement, and a read is the action diagram statement to read data from an entity type. And to do that, we need something called a persistent entity view. So we create one of these within the entity action section of the action diagram. So I'm going to create an entity view. I'm going to give it a name of DB. The entity type is user, and then the attribute I want is user ID. So then I can come back and specify I want to read the user, and then to qualify which user I want, it's a where desired, and then the user ID is equal to something, and that will be the import view. So to do that, I'm going to want a work view of my called in of my logon work, which was the attribute that we used in the logon procedure. So I could specify it like that, and that would be fine because the logon work user ID is the same domain and length as the database user ID. But in case one of those might change, for efficiency reasons, it's normally a good idea, but I'm going to just copy that and paste it as a temporary view, and I'm going to reference the temporary value of user ID so that if I ever changed the definition of either my logon work or my user ID, then the qualifying attribute is of the same length as the database column. And then what I need to do is set my temp user ID to my import user ID. When you create a read statement, by default there are two conditions, exception conditions added. When successful, in other words, the read is successful, or when not found. You can also add additional ones for when there's a database deadlock or a database error if you want to override the default gen handling of those conditions. So when it's not found, what I want to do is export an error. So I'm going to call that out, and I'm going to use my result code and message. So I set my code to 8 and a message. some sort of message there. So when the read is successful, we probably also want to create another entity action view for the logon history and add a row into the logon history table. So to do that, we use a statement called create, and we set the attributes. So the logon timestamp I'm going to set to the special system attribute current timestamp, and then I need to specify which user the logon history is for, and that's with an associate statement. So I'm going to associate the user and then the relationship which has it. So that creates the logon history. So there's our validate and logon, and then we need to view match. So the logon work, I'm going to view match, and I'm going to view match back the result, and then I'm going to just copy that statement if the return code is greater than or equal to 8. So there's our validation containing the read and the logon history creation. So I'm going to save that. One thing I'm going to do is get rid of some of these messages so that there aren't too many, and the one I'm going to get rid of is actually within the menu. In a previous exercise we added an additional message, so I'm just going to get rid of that one. And in this message we're saying hello and then the user ID. Maybe we want to be more friendly and say hello and then the first name. So to do that I need the first name of the user, and I can do that because easily enough in the validate, because I've already read the user. So if I add the first name into the entity action view and copy that into an export view, then I can view match back the username, and then I can substitute that for the temp user first name. One final thing is I created the export view and I read the data in the entity action view, but of course I need to move the data from this view to this view. So on successful read I'm going to move the user to the out user. So moving the data from the entity action view to the export view. Right, so now we can generate that, and I need to make sure when I'm generating, in this case I've specified my database as Oracle. So far we haven't created any delete statements, but because we created the database, in case we create any delete statements, we also need to generate a special type of code called the RI triggers. So I'm going to generate and build the RI triggers so that if we subsequently create a database statement that does a delete, then the RI trigger to implement that is available. And you need to regenerate the RI triggers whenever you change the database definition. So I'm going to go ahead and build that. And that's built okay. So now we can test. So pick my menu and press the test button. And I'll log on. There's the warning that we're not validating the password yet, and there is the welcome message, hello, and you'll notice the first name there. So there's our first database access statement completed. We created a new action block. Within that action block we created a read statement and created the logon history when not found, the errors. So we just test the when not found as well. Run the menu again. And then the error message, you're not defined to this system. So at that point I'll just save the model. So just moving on to some additional features. For example, we may only want to store the last 10 logon histories. So when we create a new logon history, we want to delete, if there's 10 or more, delete the previous ones. So to do that, we maybe want to know how many logon histories, that records there are. And to do that, we can read all of the logon history. So instead of a read, which reads one record from the database, we'll use a read each, which reads many. So I'm going to read all of the logon history, and then where desired logon history is related to the current user. So that reads all of the logon history. But I don't want them in any old order. I want them sorted by descending timestamp. So I get the most recent one first. And then I want to count them. So I'm going to create a work view of temp REF supplied count. And then within the read each, I'm going to increment, so that's temp IF supply count, and to temp IF supply count plus 1. And one of the features in Studio Developer is the autocomplete, because incrementing a numeric attribute view is a very common coding construct. Within the autocomplete features, it predefines those to the +1 or the -1, so I'll pick that. And then if the count is greater or equal to 10, I'm going to delete the logon history. So I only keep the last, in this case the last 9, and then I add the 10th in. So that's the read each. You can order them. You qualify which records you want, in this case the records for the current user, and current user is the user currently in the DB user entity action view. In other words, this entity action view that we read here, that's the current user. So now I can regenerate that. And test it. And we won't really know if it's working or not until we've done the logon a few more times. So maybe that's something that you want to practice and then use SQL Plus or whatever database access tools you have available to check that there are never more than 10 records in the logon history. So in terms of database access statements, we've seen the read, we've looked at create, we've looked at delete. There are a couple of others that we can look at. One is update. So update is modifying a record. We don't really want to do that, but just showing you the format of the update. Set the attribute to a value. And then, just delete that. If instead of processing the logon history with the delete like this, what I might want to do is count how many logon history records there are, and rather than have a read each and then return every record and increment the counter, a more efficient way of doing that is a summarize. So I could summarize my logon history, placing the count into there where the logon history is for the current user, and then if the count is greater than or equal to 10, I can delete anything more than 10. So I don't need to go through this read each if there are less than 10. First, more efficient to use the summarize. Obviously, if there's always going to be 10 or more, in this case that probably would be, you wouldn't need to bother with the summarize, but I've put that in there just to show you a different type of statement. Well, that concludes this exercise on data access statements, and what I would suggest is you come up with some more examples and practice creating the read statements, the create statements, updates, deletes.